And good evening and welcome to Red, Gold, and Bold, the Kansas City Football Podcast. With us, as always, Jeff Chadiha from the NFL Network, NFL.com, Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus, PFF.com, where you can see his work. My name is Soren Petro from Sports Radio 810, WHB in Kansas City. And the NFL Draft shed a tear. Eric Eager left only to gamble on USFL football now. It is going to be the cold days of the NFL and for Eager's bank account as we now just await training camp. Mini camps, OTAs still to come, but at least we have the draft to break down. And gentlemen, let's do it. Jeff, let's start for you. What do you think? What's the grade? Let's slap it on it. The old draft grade, the one that we look back on and say, wow, that was absolutely
That's right.
totally dead on, rock solid, perfect. What do you give it?
Yeah, I love suggesting this because I never actually do these. I'll go A minus. I was kind of thinking B plus, A minus, but I'll go A minus. I mean, end of the day, they got what they needed to get. I like the players they got. I wasn't crazy about them trading up to get McDuffie, but they're really high on him. And to people I know after they made the pick were saying other teams were really high on him. The intangibles, the intelligence, just the character. I mean, he's a really good kid. Impressed a lot of people in the pre-draft process. I wasn't as high on Karlaftis as some people were, but I think he obviously fits a need. And then Skyy Moore, the safety from Cincinnati, I think that they got some good players. So I'll go A minus here. I think other teams did around the same level, but I can't complain about what they did.
Right. All right. So A minus. That's pretty good grades. We had a little discussion like this on the radio show today, Eric. So I think I've got an idea of where you sit on this. Tell me, what letter grade are you throwing at the Chiefs and why?
By the way, love the praise in the comment section. Low key, the best Chiefs podcast out there. I agree. I think Jeff would even give this podcast an A minus. Let's be honest. Given his harsh grade. No, I said this on the radio show. I think my expectations were that Brett Veach would trade up more than he did. And so my grade is clouded a little bit by those expectations. Also, like I work for a company that, basically every single pick the Chiefs made was like a lot higher on our board than we had, than the pick was. Skyy Moore, for example, is like 33 picks later than where we had him. Karlaftis similar, like Karlaftis was like 15 picks higher. McDuffie, the thing about McDuffie, and again, when you're the 21st pick, you're the 21st best player, right? Like that's how it goes. That's how the market works. But going into the draft, his draft prop was 16.5. So you could, in theory, and I did this on the show, Petro, right? Like They gave up a quarter of a win moving up for him. If it's the 16th pick, they gave up nothing, like it was a dead on trade, right? So like, again, that's not how I'm thinking about it, but that's probably how they thought about it. Traded back for the first time in the Brett Veach era. As Jeff said, they got players at every position that they needed. Again, I gave it an A just because I look at the rest of the league and I'm thinking to myself, like, who had a better draft than them? And there are teams that you can lay claim to, like, the Green Bay Packers, even the Baltimore Ravens. I think the Jets fans are really mad at us because we gave them an A minus, but like they drafted good players. So yeah, it's a great draft for Brett Veach. I think it signaled a change in their philosophy. Maybe not as much as I would like, but coming out of the draft with 10 players when their previous high was 6 with him is pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, I would go A plus. The way I would put it is, I don't know what it looks like because I can't imagine that anything I would ever look at, I'd be like, that's all perfection. But I swear to you, the whole PFF Chiefs dance thing was a little spooky, right? I'm sitting there with multiple TVs, watching NFL Network, watching ESPN, watching the PFF.com YouTube channel, going back and forth. Eric's seen my setup. I can flip through one thing and change the TVs and have it. And I'm just, vegging out like a football junkie. And I'm watching also, all the draft trackers for NFL Network and for NFL.com and for PFF. And like every guy that's the top guy is PFF. Like I literally was like, all right, come on. What's going on? Like, I think it's just like a coincidence. And I tend to, think in an analytical approach. So I think I'm going to always lean towards the PFF approach. But I do think that this was just that perfect storm where I think they had enough needs that it was going to be pretty hard to not have value where they had needs fall to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think you could look at it and say, and we'll get to the defensive end in a minute, that I would like to have seen more defensive line, right? But I don't mind that they didn't take guys because I don't have a guy where I'm like, this guy was an absolute stud on the D-line. You should have taken him over the player you did take. So I have to give it an A. I don't like doing that. And I think we'll look back and there'll be a couple of players that we're big on or that PFF's big on or that NFL.com is big on. We're going to be like, yeah, that guy was a turd. He missed it. Or that guy was hurt the whole time or whatever. And it's not going to look as good. But I do recognize that they have, I think we would all agree, they have more needs than people realize coming into this. So that was going to make this draft look better for them because, Jeff, things were going to fall. When you need corner, DN, right tackle, safety over the horizon, wide receiver. I mean, literally all that has to happen is like not the draft to not be all guards and centers, right? And quarterbacks, and you're going to end up looking pretty good.
Yeah, and look, my thing with the draft is always this. I say the same thing every year. I never sit here the week after the draft and say, "Oh, this team did awful. Look who they got," or "This team did great. Look who they got." I always go off need. I always go off. If there's guys that I've watched who I think are going to be stars, and I say, yeah, I think I unlike PFF, I like what the Jets did. I think they got 3 players that could have been top 10 players or were supposed to be top 10 players coming into the draft. I think that's pretty impressive. But I think overall, until these guys actually start playing, you don't know what you got. And that's the reality of it. So, yeah, I do think that it's important to remember that they went into this draft looking to fill needs. They got players who I think it was a very practical draft for them. I think typically they're more of a swing for the fences type administration when it comes to this stuff. They'll take guys who are either have some red flags to them or the Edwards-Helaire pick was more of a luxury pick, but it was more about, hey, this guy's going to be a star for us, or we think this guy can be a star. We're getting a deal here. This was more of this is the most sensible pick we can make here. This guy has very tangible things we like. He has intangible qualities that we like, and we feel good about it. Look, I love that they broke trends here, that they actually went beyond the Mississippi River and found some players, that they went north of the Mason-Dixon line and found some players that Brett Veach traded back. So all those things tell me that they're going in the right direction, what they're doing personnel-wise.
Isn't it a little bit, though? I mean, Brett Veach has said, and he was he wasn't defensive. He was matter of fact in how he said it, but he made the point when asked about defensive backs. He's like, listen, there's this vibe out there that we don't like. We don't invest in corners. That's not the case. This is what he said at the end of the season. That's just how it's fallen. And I that was great to hear him say it, but now the opportunity arose and he acted on it. And so I do think that, it's one thing to say it. And listen, because he's traded up and traded away picks for players, he hadn't had that many opportunities to prove it. This time, as we pointed out, maybe later than I would have done it, later than Eric would have done it. Jeff, I don't know where you would have been, but they've had to shift gears, right? They're topped out on the cap, and so they needed draft picks. And when they needed to do it, to your point, Jeff, he did it, right? Like he didn't just keep going, well, I can't help myself. I was worried when they moved up for McDuffie. I'm like, here we go. 12 picks is going to be 4. Like they're going to get a third first round pick. They're going to get or they're going to move for, like, AJ Brown is coming with a $20+ million contract, right? Like I was a little bit nervous when he made that move, but he did show restraint, traded down. I'll get into what I think they were thinking when they traded down, and checked off a lot of boards. And to me, threw math at it, Eric, by taking 5 defensive backs, it's not incumbent upon just one of them having to hit. They did what we've talked about. They acknowledged that there will be misses, and they threw numbers at a position they needed.
Yeah, I think about this is a very big throwback, but I think about a couple teams when I think about how the Chiefs went about their sort of approach here. You guys remember the night when Randy Moss hit the league and he, like, in that Monday night game went like 5 for 210 and 3 or something against Green Bay, and then another game he had like 7 for 100. And Green Bay drafted 3 corners in the first 3 rounds of the next draft. And ultimately, the best corner of that group was Mike McKenzie, who was the 3rd round pick of the 3. There's not a very good chance. And then you look at last year's Bengals, right? You look at last year's Bengals secondary. They spent $14 million APY on Trey Waynes. They had a relatively modest deal for Chidobe Awuzie. They got Trey Flowers off of waivers. They got Eli Apple, on a relatively modest deal. And Trey Waynes is the most expensive of those guys, and he was the worst of them, right? And they didn't care. They played the 3 best guys at corner, and they made the Super Bowl, right? They've thrown numbers at the position, and I don't know what the 3 starting corners are going to look like. I said on your show today, like, Rashad Fenton was pretty good last year. He might get cut. Like, what, DeAndre Baker was a first-round pedigree, a guy that Veach, stuck his neck out for. He might get cut, right? They let Mike Hughes go. Like this, they just got to find 3 corners out of this group now. And you increase your odds of doing so substantially by having 6 or 7 guys in the room that have what you want, right? I agree with you. Like, I tweeted this out a few times. I go, Veach, hold your water. Hold your water, hold your water. And like, to his, again, and this is my expectation, they did give up some to get the trade for McDuffie. And like, he has shorter arms, but then they when it came to the corner position, they threw numbers, but they also threw diversity at it too. McDuffie's not like a long levered guy who is of the Sean Smith ilk, but the guys that they took later in the draft were. And L'Jarius Sneed's more of that guy. And so, maybe McDuffie plays inside, outside. Maybe he plays a Matthew kind of position. I don't know. Like, again, they've gone from needing 5 specific guys to be pretty good to now needing a subset of 5 of 12 guys to be good in the secondary, which I think is just so much better, of a gamble for them to make.
Jeff, do you like the move for McDuffie specifically? Was he the right corner? And we can bring in defensive end, right? Because Karlaftis is who they took at 30. They clearly felt like, okay, there's going to be an edge there. I mean, I don't think there's any way that one of the first 2 picks wasn't going to be an edge. And if I'm wrong, there was no way that one of the first 2 picks wasn't going to be a corner. If I've got that read wrong, I think the edge was where their mindset was, and McDuffie was too high on their board to let him go. And when he got to 21, they said, okay, this isn't going to be that expensive. We can go get him. And to Eric's point, I agree. I think he wasn't their typical corner, which speaks to how much they actually do like his football skills, because he's not just a square peg for a square hole, right? Yeah. Like the longest guy out there. That to me says they went for a guy. We need a guy who can really cover. We'll put our our model in play later on. I never really love trade ups, but this one certainly seems like this is how you're supposed to do it when you do it.
Yeah, I thought when they traded up, like a lot of people, that it was going to be Jermaine Johnson with that pick. I thought edge was the most important thing they should have gotten. I didn't love it at the time. We had text exchange going back and forth. I think you thought McDuffie wouldn't have been there later. I mean, that's debatable. I mean, the only thing I could say about him that I do question is that teams that needed quarterbacks did pass on him. New England needed a corner. They traded out. The Vikings needed a corner. They traded out. But again, I think he's a really good player. And my feeling was more so that, would you rather have Jermaine Johnson and whoever was the 4th best corner in the draft, or what they ended up getting? End of the day, we'll never know what's the better deal. But ultimately, again, when I talked to a friend of mine who's was on a team that could have drafted Jermaine Johnson much higher, he said, well, look, here's the deal. It's that he's not as good as people say he is. Like, there was a lot of people who were hyping him up, but the get off wasn't as great as people thought. He was a good player, not a great player, which I always love when players start falling. All of a sudden, you go into the draft and it's just, this guy's the greatest thing ever. Yeah. Going to be a franchise cornerstone, and then they start falling. It's like, well, this is what's really happening with the guy. So we'll never know. But the thing about Karlaftis that is a little bit worrisome for me is that he doesn't have that freakish athletic natural bend that you want to see from a great pass rusher. He's what a guy said to me, he's a try-hard guy. And they already got a try-hard guy in Frank Clark. So he's a younger try-hard guy. I think he's probably a higher character try-hard guy. And I hope he has success doing that. But I think that ultimately he won the day because of intangible stuff, personality, character, intelligence, motor, all those things. I think if he ends up being Chris Long for this team, that's a good thing. He's not going to be J.J. Watt, which is why I would give this draft an A-, because I think the players they got up high, I think are really good players. I don't know if they're Pro Bowl players.
It's interesting though, right? Like Karlaftis is very. You're right, and I suggest, I'm a subscriber to Seth Kaiser's stuff. I watched his, I read his thing about Karlaftis, and it's very interesting. He did not do a 3-cone drill, like it was the only drill he didn't do, and maybe that was something that could have exposed him maybe for his lack of bend. These are things I don't know as a math guy, but you're talking about a guy who, 92nd percentile on the vertical jump, 78th percentile on broad jump. 69th percentile on short shuttle stuff. Arm length is like middle percentile, 40 times. Like this isn't a bad athlete, right? This is a very modest athlete for the. I said Aaron Campman on the show, and Aaron Campman's a guy who got double-digit sacks as a 4-3 defensive end for the Packers numerous times, but as far as, it does. But like at the thing at Purdue is like he didn't have anybody playing with him. He got double teamed a lot, and he still was productive. Like productive from a pressure standpoint, not necessarily a sack standpoint. And if he can get 5-6 pressures a game, I mean, we're talking about a substantial upgrade over what Frank Clark gave them.
I want to address this one from Terry. He says Karlaftis reminds me of Jared Allen, to which I would ask why? Because he's white. Because he doesn't at all remind me of Jared Allen. And I love you, Terry. You're one of our regulars, brother. And it's always great to hear from you, buddy. But, I mean, Jared Allen was 6'6", 200 – he slimmed down. Like, when he really took off, he was 245 pounds. Yeah. And he had the bend, that Eric's talking about. I'm not going to act like I'm a scout, but I've seen a lot of football, and I've talked to a lot of scouts, and I think I know at least the basics of what to look for. And that bend is where the legs look like they're almost parallel to the ground, and the body is then, straight up and down, and you're holding off that defensive end, and you're turning that corner. And the only guy who had that better in a Chiefs uniform in my lifetime than Jared Allen was Derek Thomas. And Derek Thomas had it better than anybody ever. And that includes Lawrence Taylor. And anybody who wants to tell me Lawrence Taylor had more of that can stick it, because you're wrong. Go look at the video. Okay. Nobody had it like Derek Thomas had. And I do get it. I do get what they're talking about with Karlaftis. And I think the better comp is Tamba Hali. Tamba Hali was not a guy that really beat anybody off his first move. Most of Tamba Hali's sacks were either like cleaning up somebody else's, flush the quarterback, or coverage sacks. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Like there's only a handful of Derek Thomases where it's like 1,000, 2, oh, Jesus, he just sacked them. Like, there's only a handful of those guys. It's Von Miller at his peak. It's Khalil Mack at his peak. It's DT. It's LT. There's like a handful of guys. I mean, Kevin Green went to the Hall of Fame. He wasn't one of those guys, right? There are lots of guys.
Chris Dolan, right, was a bigger guy that could beat. But like, to your point, Soren, like what did the Chiefs do in this draft? They selected secondary players that can make the quarterback path the ball. So you think about what was Tamba Hali's best season? It's probably 2010, right? What was characteristic about the 2010 Tamba Hali season? Brandon Flowers was worth like 2/3 of a win above replacement. Was it a top 5 corner in the NFL last year? Brandon Carr is like the Shane Battier of the NFL. Like, he just got the thing done. And you had great safety play with Barry. You had great coverage under linebackers with Derek Johnson. And the quarterback patted the ball for an extra 0.2 of a second. And that's when Hali could come through the back porch and knock the ball out of the quarterback's hand. And by the way, I know I'm not a big fan of this guy at all. But that's who Frank Clark is too. Yeah. Right? Frank Clark, the sack against Garoppolo in the Super Bowl was after 4 seconds. And, effort is not a problem with Frank Clark. It's like athleticism. It's basically all the stuff you draft. It is a problem with Frank Clark. Effort is not. And so and there was a great question here, by Irish Mac. Bottom line, does it improve the defense? And I think absolutely it improves the defense. It gives you depth there. I know that they gave that that UFA offer to Melvin Ingram, meaning that if he doesn't get signed by July 22nd, then the Chiefs have the only team he can play for, I think is the thing, is 1 year, 4.4 for the Chiefs. So he's another guy that can come in and help. Jerry Hughes is on the, is a free agent as well. Jadeveon Clowney's sort of a pipe dream, but there's possibilities there. But I think the biggest thing is the coverage is marrying with the pass rush. And if you have better coverage and the quarterbacks have to hold the ball longer, Chris Jones is a guy that wins quickly on this defense. Everybody else is a try-hard guy, and Karlaftis, I think, has high-end ability, with the ceiling there. Your defense is better. Your defense is better with this acquisition.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I think Karlaftis, who's like 6'2", and I've seen listed as heavy as 275. What I think may be the case is if they can find other edge guys, is he's the guy that slides inside on obvious passing downs and rushes from the inside. And if you have him next to Chris Jones, high motor, two guys, that's hell on wheels for people.
And that's where Leo Chenal comes in, right? So Leo Chenal, I mean, you look at, we talked about this on your show. I didn't like them drafting a linebacker only because you hit on Willie Gay and Nick Bolton, and I don't like draft picks that cut into that value. Now, we had not seen this out of Spags. We never saw it out of Sutton either. But if you run a 3-3-5 nickel on third down, or a 3-2, trying to get the numbers right, 2-3-6 dime, where you have Karlaftis and Jones as the pass rushers, and you have Bolton and Gay, and then you have Chenal as sort of like a linebacker who's kind of a roaming guy around the line of scrimmage. He was a plus pass rusher at Wisconsin. That's one of his traits. Not a great coverage guy, but he could be one of those like sort of monster backs or whatever they're called for this defense. Like that was an interesting pick too.
Yeah, I do like that pick, and I like the value there because I'm with you. That was the most surprising one because I'm like, this is not – that to me is them actually taking the best player available. And it'll be interesting to see what they can do with them tools-wise to I mean, he's 260 as well. I mean, they definitely got bigger and more physical, right? I mean, I think they have not been – there was a few years ago they wanted to talk about toughness and, we're a tougher defense. I think it was when they took Breeland Speaks, and I think that may have been the road they were headed down. I can't remember the year that they just kept talking about being tough. Karlaftis is tough. Like Chenal is tough. All the kids they took in the Brian Cook is a heat missile and is going to rough people up. They got guys that will come up and pop you. And I think that's something that is a trait. One, their corners are usually good tacklers. And I think definitely McDuffie's there to cover, but I think the other guys are there to come up and help support the run. And if you get Charvarius, if you get 85, 90% of Charvarius Ward out of one of these other corners for, 7% of the cost, like, you're a better football team. The cost that the 49ers were paying him, you're a better football team. So, I mean, again, he doesn't have to be Derek Thomas for this to be a good pick. He just has to be a high effort guy, knock some people around, set the edge. The most concerning thing for me about Karlaftis is I don't hear anybody going tremendous at setting the edge, right? And that's one thing that Justin Houston, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe the upside is Justin Houston on his pass rush ability. And even he wasn't Derek Thomas, even though he had a 22 sack season. But, I don't know that he'll set the edge the way Justin Houston did. I mean, he really did help out against the run. I'm curious, Jeff, to the point you made, like if we roll it back and they do, and they take Johnson instead, right? Do you would you rather have had Jermaine Johnson and Kyer Elam? Because that presumably, if we read what they did, they moved up to get McDuffie because they thought someone else was going to take a corner.
Yeah,
that would presumably be Buffalo, and that Buffalo would rather had McDuffie based upon their thought process. And so Elam would have been the next guy, or any of the other corners. Would you rather have Johnson and Elam or one of the other corners that was available than the Karlaftis McDuffie combo?
I don't think about McDuffie that I'll say, I keep saying the only thing about him, but to me, from everything I was hearing, and I go off what the guys I talk to, like the Daniel Jeremiahs, the Bucky Brooks guys I know, who've been scouts who do this, it didn't seem like there was, after Sauce Gardner and Derek Stingley Jr., now you could quibble about this. McDuffie clearly was the third best corner. Was he that much better than the guy you just mentioned? Elam, Kyler Gordon,
Andrew Booth,
who had some medical stuff going on there. I don't know. We'll find that out. If it wasn't that much of a difference, then yeah, maybe a Jermaine Johnson and one of those guys makes a little more sense. But again, Johnson was getting dinged for things that people weren't talking about before the draft. And my sense of it is, it's like, I guess we're going to find out how they're going to play defense now. And I think Eric brings up a good point. It's going to probably feel a lot more like what the Ravens do, which is rely more on their secondary to set the agenda and mix and matching coverage and trying to find more guys who can win matchups. Because when you look at a guy like McDuffie, the length will be an issue against some teams in the AFC West. I mean, there's some big receivers in the AFC West. Devontae Adams is a big receiver. The guys in Broncos are big receivers. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams are big receivers. So you're going to have to be able to match up with that. Rashad Fenton ain't a giant either. And so you're going to have to find ways to deal with that. But again, all these tall guys that got coming in, along with Lonnie Johnson, they seem to be finding their way to the idea of, yeah, let's build our back end so it's stronger and we don't have to rely so much on finding a dominant edge rusher to lead this pass rush that hasn't been what we hoped it would be. Yeah,
to your point, Jeff, like I heard significant grumblings that they were in on Kyler Gordon too in round 2, which was such a missed opportunity. We could call him Washington, KC, the nation's capital. Like, we could have done so many cool things with that secondary if we got both Washington corners. That would have been fun. But like, to your point, I mean, what was the last 2 losses, right? So the Chiefs last year, were disappointing, right? In a fun way, but like from October until today, they've lost 2 games to one team. And that team that beat them was a team where you throw your hands up and say, look, like when Charvarius Ward is on Chase, we don't really got a shot, right? And to your point, Jeff, like when you have, like if you put all your eggs in the McDuffie basket with those short arms and that kind of thing, you're left with the same problem. Like, you're going to face some teams, and it's like the Blues playing the Wild last night in the NHL. It's like, it's a bad matchup, even though one team's better than the other. Now you've got the long levered corners that you drafted. You got McDuffie. You got L'Jarius Sneed's, ability to sort of play inside outside. You got safety play now. You're less fragile to some of these matchups than you were. And again, like, because I think when they won the Super Bowl in 19, it was like they caught a real nice string of opponents, right, in the Super Bowl, and when they ran into the Bucs in the Super Bowl, you could see matchups matter in the NFL, and so when you throw numbers, you're more diverse, you're more anti-fragile to some of these like issues that can arise when you play teams that have elite talent, and there's a lot of teams in the AFC that have elite talent.
So, Jeff, how good is this defense now after you add the pieces in that are in the draft? They're making a play to bring Melvin Ingram back with the UFA tag they put on him. And Brett Veach talked today about maybe wanting, they'll be keeping their eyes out on the market for other defenders, but largely this is going to be their group. How good does this defense look to you?
Well, I'd say they're better on paper. Looking at some of the comments here, I think people are excited more about the disappearance of Daniel Sorensen and Ben Neiman than the addition of Trent McDuffie and George Karlaftis. But on paper, I think they've acknowledged some weaknesses here. And I'm not going to say it was hubris, maybe a little bit, but maybe just it was the way things were for so long and it was successful. But I think they just believe that ultimately we're going to outscore everybody. We have the quarterback, we have the offense. As long as our defense is okay or just middle of the road, we'll be all right. And I think they've come around to the idea of we need to be better on that side of the football. So I like that they got younger. I like that they've added more depth in the secondary, more talent in the secondary. I still believe that a lot of what happens here is going to be what goes on up front. I mean, you still have a guy you're paying $84 million to that needs to be a difference maker in the playoffs in Chris Jones. You still have Frank Clark, who God knows what he's going to give you. And you're still relying on a 34-year-old Melvin Ingram to be a key player in this and a rookie. And so there's going to be a lot of questions, that you should have about this team. But they're adding talent, no doubt about it. The young talent they have on this team, the Nick Boltons, the Willie Gays, the Sneeds, the McDuffies, the Karlaftis. So that's a nice foundation to have moving forward.
Eric, how good's he?
I mean, last year, what were they, a middle of the pack team? If you look at, you kind of average points and yards and stuff like that. I think they're 5 spots better.
Okay.
Okay. So like, fringe top 10 defense, even on a bad day, right? Last year on a bad day, they were the worst defense in the NFL. And on a good day, they were a top 10 group. I think that this lowers that variance.
Yeah, I do. I think they're better, but I like the point that Jeff made a lot, that I really do think this was a draft that I believe that they were looking for more along the defensive line. Brett Veach said today that they didn't really see any interior players, that it was very thin. So I think the D tackle idea, there were names that were being floated out there. I don't think they were ever really, unless Jordan Davis was going to fall into their lap or something. And at 30, I don't think they were really looking at that. But I think there were other edge guys that they wouldn't have minded grabbing. And if they weren't, then they need to watch more tape of Frank Clark and understand that they need to be, right? Like they need to remind themselves of what that looks like. Watching a man get dominated the way he got dominated, because it was not pretty. And so I really hope that they were. And this draft was just one of those cases where, like, hey, we couldn't get the corners. It's not that we don't value them. It just wasn't presenting itself, and that it presented itself that way. Like, I was really hoping when we got down to pick 62, and I'm going to talk about the trade down here in a second with you guys, but, Drake Jackson went 61 to the Niners. And that was kind of a dream for me. I'm like, if Drake Jackson gets there at 62, and I don't mind that they ended up going safety, but if there was a possibility for a trade up in my mind, was because if you can add a guy who's got all the tools in Drake Jackson, but just doesn't, either the effort's not there or the knowledge, whatever it is, and try to unlock that potential with the try-hard athlete guy, on the other side, those are two good guys. That's a nice combination to have. I would like to have seen that happen. It didn't. I don't mind that they didn't trade up. I don't mind the way they did it, but I do think that they're still looking for a defensive end. And I think that's something that, they're going to have to still focus on, or they're going to have to compensate for during the course of the season. How about the trade down, though? Let me try this one on for you. Here's what I think happened at pick 50. 50 rolls around. They're thinking wide out. They're thinking corner. I think all the corners had gone, though. You mentioned if you look at them, like every name we've mentioned, Alontae Taylor was the last one from Tennessee. He had gone.
Which I don't think was high on their board. Alontae Taylor was drafted over by like 50 picks.
Yeah, but I'm giving every corner. Andrew Booth had gone. I'm just going back up the list. Kyler Gordon had gone. Jalen Petrie had gone. All these guys, McCrary from Auburn.
Boye Mafe had gone, I think, a little bit. The edge goes. Yeah, that was one that.
I think they sat there, and I think at 50 they went, the pick we're supposed to take here is Pickens. We're supposed to take George Pickens. And I think what inspired, like, I think it might be 3 more years before Brett Veach moves down. And I think what it was is all the off-field stuff, because I think we saw this when the Chiefs traded down, whatever year it was, for Larry Johnson. They were going to take Larry Johnson at 16. And there was a disagreement there, and Dick Vermeil wanted to take a defensive lineman, wanted to take a defensive player, and Carl Peterson and his scouting department are looking at his scouts, are telling him Larry Johnson's a beast. He's the guy, right? And it was a little bit different era. I know the running back thing now, and Larry Johnson had
so long ago.
Two of the best years ever, right? It's a different time. But Carl Peterson said, okay, I'm getting the hell out of 16, and we're going to move down. Now, they were not, by the way, going to take the guy who went there, which was Troy Polamalu. The Steelers moved up and took Troy Polamalu because they'd just taken Jerome Woods the year before at safety. They were not going to go safety again. And so he moves down, and lo and behold, at like 30 or 31, Larry Johnson's still on the board. Dick Vermeil still wants a defender. And he's like, listen, I moved out once so that hopefully Larry Johnson would go and it would clear this problem up, right? And I wouldn't have this conflict. But we got an extra pick, but now the best guy on the board by far, he's the best at 16. He's the best at 31. We're taking Larry Johnson. Again, forget the running back thing. That was how that shaped up. I think at 50, it was Bruce Pickens is here. And you had guys, I'm sure, in that room going, he is the guy. You got to go get him. And you had guys going, we're not taking an a-hole. Like, no, you can't do that. Not at 50. We have too many needs. And he said, okay, I'm trading out. And he moved down 4 spots. The problem corrected itself because Pickens went to the Steelers at 52, and then he still got a wide receiver that's highly thought of. Jeff, I think that's what you're supposed to do in those spots.
He should be addicted to it now.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah. No, it should be a great feeling. And someone joked that he got some golf clap in the war room right when he did it, as if people were actually like giving him credit jokingly for making that move. But yeah, I think it was a very smart play. And it was the same situation we're talking about that could have been there with the corners, where he just said, we got a group of guys we like here, and they're pretty similar. I can get some value here. I can get a pick back later in the round and still get the receiver we like. I do find it interesting that the receiver that they liked is a former college running back who is pretty shifty and 5'10" and plays big. And
are you saying they're going to make him a running back? Is that what you're saying? This is
I'm just saying, it sounds like a lot like Tyreek Hill. It sounds like he's got some things that Tyreek Hill did in college back in the day. But I like the player that they got. And I think that what I like about it even more is that the way that he explained it, it was almost like he was describing having a basketball team, where he had he's got his speed guy, he's got his power guy, he's got his shifty guy, his little point guard now. And so they added, personally, I think he sounds like what they hoped Mecole Hardman would have become by now, which is a guy who's smaller but plays big, can be physical, can do a lot of things, can catch the ball consistently, run crisp routes. And so we'll see how he evolves. We know it's not easy for young receivers to play in this offense, but I like this kind of pick, this kind of player for this offense, because we've seen Andy Reid find ways to use guys like Mecole Hardman and Tyreek Hill early in their careers and make the most of their strengths where they're learning how to play the position. So, yeah, trading down was certainly something I like to see them doing, because they got value and got a good player in the process.
Eric, can I take a shot at a comp on what I think
okay.
he can get your thought? How about Emmanuel Sanders?
I like it. I mean, Emmanuel Sanders is like, if his arms were a foot longer, we would be talking about no Super Bowls right now.
Yeah. By the way, those would be long arms.
Yeah, they would be long arms. The one thing I like, by the way, is I know people will look at his frame and say, oh, this is a slot player. About 2/3 of his plays at Western Michigan were outside, but he did have 250 slot plays. So he's not somebody who can only play one or the other. Now he can move. To me, I think that's what part of, to Jeff's point, which is they want Mecole Hardman. I agree with this. I agree with Adam. By the way,
right.
They wanted Mecole Hardman to do be able to do a lot more, right? And he just can't, right? He can't handle, he's somebody who can do a lot of things, can do a few things really well for this team. And now that you have, MVS taking the top off the defense, a guy who I think does a pretty good job of tracking the ball and is really fast. You have Juju Smith-Schuster, who does the underneath stuff, is good after the catch, and is a bigger body. You have, Skyy Moore, who can kind of play everything. I actually think in a league where 190-pound wide receivers are kind of the norm now, he can be their number one. He couldn't probably have been the number one in 1996, but he can be the number one now. That frees up Mecole Hardman to do all the other stuff, right? And it makes the offense a little bit better. Emmanuel Sanders is a good comp. I think that's, it took Sanders a while in the league. He first had to go. He went to Pittsburgh, and then he had to go to Denver. I hope it doesn't take that long for Skyy Moore, but I think they had a choice of a few guys, and I think they picked the right one.
Yeah, I like the pick. I like the player. I don't think he's going to be crushing people over the top, but I mean, if he's dedicated to the craft of learning the routes and he can operate on the same wavelength as Patrick Mahomes, then I think it's going to be a nice combination, right? And look, the Steelers didn't know that they had what was going to be over a 4-year stretch the most prolific receiver in football when they took Antonio Brown, right, out of the same conference and maybe even the same school.
Same school.
Yeah, same school. They didn't know
Central. That. Yeah,
I can't remember if he was Central or Western.
Yeah, he was Central.
He was directional Michigan, right? One of them.
Yeah. Went to school with J.J. Watt. How about that? In the MAC? Same roster.
Yeah. Until people don't know that J.J. Watt actually was there before Wisconsin. They may not know about his transfer because everyone just goes Wisconsin. But I like, if you just get a bunch of good receivers and you have a Hall of Fame quarterback, it's going to work fine. Right. I mean, that's the thing. Hopefully,
Julian Edelman played at Kent State. Played quarterback at Kent State.
And if he's Julian Edelman, that's great. Then yes, next year you're on the prowl for your big number one. But just getting good receivers is collecting good receivers will eventually add up. By the way, I wanted to hit on a couple of things that were said. What about like on the defensive end, like bringing in Ndamukong Suh, right? Like I do agree, and I agree with Vincent here. Says, I just don't know about the second D tackle spot, right? I want to hit a couple of folks. If you're joining us via the podcast, we do stream live Tuesdays at 9, every other Tuesday in the off season. We'll be back to every Tuesday once we roll closer to the season. But and we got a lot of folks in the chat room that are putting up some ideas there. I mean, I do like that. Those I think are good points. And I think this one, you got to highlight this one, don't you? Troy, D Ford was the best at setting the edge. But if he didn't run the wrong direction, he never set an edge ever. I don't even think when he painted, he could put an edge on the window.
Get after the passer.
Yeah, he could with his one speed move, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that didn't work, oh well, maybe.
I mean, that year where they had Mahomes' first year, and they randomly had the worst defense in the league, but somehow got the first team to go 3. They won the toss, deferred, had the first team go 3 and out every single game for like the first 8 weeks of the year. Got a lead, and D Ford was just like, forget the run. I'm going after the court. I'm getting my contract. Like that. He was pretty effective.
Yeah. At that one thing that he was trying to accomplish, right? All right, 4 non-Power 5 players. Now, they did have 12 picks going in. They did make 10 selections. But that's as many non-Power 5 selections as they had in the previous 3 years combined, Jeff. Is that – do we see that as a positive, a negative? I mean, they've been pretty hit or miss. They hit with guys like Tyreek Hill. They hit, Eric Fisher. A lot of people thought you should take Jokel was the safer player. From A&M, a Power 5 school. They went with the MAC player. That ended up being the right selection there. They've had their successes, but this is a little bit, particularly with Veach, a little bit out of the character. It's been 2 years. They didn't take one small school guy last year. What do you make of this?
Snead was one, 2 years ago, right? Snead was the last one. It worked out. Well, again, I think it's a positive sign. I was saying earlier about breaking trends. I mean, I think this team has been overly reliant on SEC schools to fuel their draft picks, and I get it. Look, SEC is the best conference in college football. A lot of good players, a lot of good teams, but sometimes it felt as if they were over assessing players because of their playing in that conference. And so I like that they're going to different parts of the country to find players in different levels of football to find players. I think that it's as we've seen over the last decade, there's a lot of really good players out there playing at smaller programs. And if you want to do what Eric has constantly said, develop players, you got to find the talent first. And sometimes when you go to these SEC programs, these bigger programs, you're finding kids just based off their name or based off their reputations. You're not getting kids who have chips on their shoulders or kids who want to prove something. And I think where this team is at right now, I always go back to something Ron Rivera told me about when the Carolina Panthers, the year after they went to the Super Bowl with Cam Newton. He said, you get a few guys coming in here, younger guys get drafted, and they think, well, it's always going to be success. And you got to have guys who come in and understand that we need to prove ourselves. And we need to go out here and we got to fight and scrap and claw. And you saw that from this team in the second half of last season when they were fighting to get back on top and get that number one, get back into a position where they could actually win a championship. I think the players they got bring that to the table. So I like seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff brings up a couple of great points. I think the one is this idea of, and this is studies I used to always show because I taught it. I taught at like a smaller college. I also went to a smaller college, and there's like the study that essentially like the average student at Harvard doesn't have that much different of an outcome than the best student at like a small liberal arts college. And the question becomes like, why? Well, an average student at Harvard comes into everything more talented than a student at a small liberal arts college. But that average student at Harvard is not getting, they're not getting the prestigious like grant to work with a professor. They're not getting the attention from they're just an also-ran there, and the development might not necessarily be there. Whereas a student, like the best student at a small liberal arts college, is not as talented, maybe, but they get all the development, right? And they get all of the sort of coaching and things like that. And maybe there's something to this idea of like you go to Alabama and you're just part of a factory, right? The scheme props you up. You're a great player. You're part of a name, and like, the Marlon Humphreys are playing next to the Anthony Averets, and Marlon Humphreys is a real good player, but Anthony Averets catching a couple interceptions, and he's drafted in the NFL. Whereas, like, if you want to succeed from Western Michigan, you got to be a baller like Skyy Moore was, and you had to have to develop. And so maybe there's something to that. It'd be interesting to test that, but I think
when you prove yourself like Skyy Moore, they feed you the ball, and so you're getting more reps, and you're working on your craft more often. They're designing plays for you. You're becoming more knowledgeable about how the scheme works, how you fit into it, where it is, because you're getting the ball.
Yeah,
right?
You get confidence. You get the confidence of being getting better at your craft. That I think maybe that, again, like the thing that like I don't have access to, and I'd love to. We're measuring it indirectly with data, is like the mental makeup of these guys. Like there's a grittiness, and like I use the technical term, like the grittiness associated with being a small school guy and having to prove yourself. To Jeff's point, I think, Soren, you said this after the 2019 Super Bowl. Is it the best thing to go into the 2020 year with 22 starters because every one of them has tasted a championship and maybe they're not as hungry as before? Like maybe, this new influx. I mean, how many Chiefs starters this year are not going to be a part of the 2019 team? It's going to be a lot. And I think it's going to, add an influx of desperation maybe to the team that they I'm not saying they lacked. I mean, they made it back to the Super Bowl in 2020, but like, there's maybe a little bit of an edge there that they didn't have before.
Yeah. I go back to Jimmy Johnson when he would talk about why he would, his big thing was he was taking at Miami, he was taking safeties and making them linebackers, making them DNs, making them D tackles, because he wanted speed everywhere on the field. And he said, guys get used to running fast. And even though you put weight on them and you bulk them up, they know what it feels like to run fast. And he said they carry that speed, even though we bulk them up. They carry an idea, a concept of being fast because they've been fast. They know that they're fast for what they were. And I think that's almost kind of like when you draft guys from the smaller schools. They know what success feels like, and they're going to keep reaching until they get to the success. They'll rise with the tide and do whatever it takes to rise above. I think that's the theory. But listen, I mean, that's a great theory, and we can spin yarns about why it's all great. There is still the reality that for every L'Jarius Sneed, there's Starkarius Keys from
good old Bo Pete.
Colin Saunders.
I love some of these names, by the way. Who's the guy? Boodle?
DiCaprio Boodle. He was a
DiCaprio. You can't make that stuff up.
Darwin Thompson from Utah State.
Darwin Thompson, by the way, was misunderstood. Remember when Darwin Thompson in that Week 17 game absolutely ran all over the Los Angeles Chargers? But that was the Darwin Thompson thing was a flaw, and it was a
the termite. Was that his nickname?
In what world would you rather have I mean, maybe Darrell Williams pass protected better than Darwin. Maybe he had pictures of some. I don't know, but like Darwin Thompson had juice. I don't get it.
I'll stick up for Darrell Williams. I think this is a team that has not been physical, and every football team, bristles at what are you talking about? Listen, I know there's an inherent toughness that it takes to play in the National Football League, but there are tougher teams. Like nobody's been tougher than before the headhunting rules of the Steeler Ravens games were like gladiators out there for.
I mean, the New Orleans Saints won a Super Bowl by literally putting bounties on other teams' players.
But I will say this: for every Traymon Smith, there is also a Kareem Hunt, right? Yeah. I mean, that's Toledo. Like they're there. Like there's a spot to go get the guy.
By the way, Dustin Crum. No, that's Kent State. Dustin Crum, the undrafted quarterback, also a Mac guy.
I'm excited about him being the sneak quarterback. Let's get him out there since Blake Bell.
Belldozer.
Yeah, my Belldozer plan went to crap with the botched option play. By the way, hit us up with the likes and the loves and the retweets and the subscriptions, if you would. By the way, don't cost nothing, but it helps us out immensely. So if you would hit that like button, it goes a long way towards helping us out. So thank you very much. If you do that, we've already had a number of people do it on whatever format or platform you're watching us live here, and you can do that as well on your podcast. What is the biggest need now for this team, Jeff? Like, where does their attention? For me, it's D-line. They seem to signal that with the Melvin Ingram move. Is there something beyond that?
I think it's D-line. I mean, I think it's going to be D-line until you get 4 guys up there that you can be comfortable with. Like we just, someone mentioned the second defensive tackle situation, Melvin Ingram. Part of me wonders with Ingram if by taking this time off last year and really not playing much in Pittsburgh for the first half of the season, he was able to be healthier down the stretch. Like I wonder what he would be like in a full season of football. Because he was having injuries with the Chargers, which was becoming an issue over there. And so, again, I don't want to put a lot of trust into a 34-year-old defensive end, but he played at a high level for this team. He was their best defensive player down the stretch, on the line at least. And, yeah, they got to get him back in the fold and probably find somebody else in there as well.
Eric?
Yeah, it's defensive line. And I think the issue is like, we're lining up for another year where Chris Jones is a full-time player, and I think that is increasingly risky for this team. Chris Jones is one of their best players on defense. I think, unfortunately, though, he can't play every snap. He can't start every game. He has to. I mean, he's at his best when he's coming off the bench. And they have somebody like Mike Pennell. They have somebody like Derek Nottie playing well. Derek Nottie regressed a lot last year. Played pretty well a couple years before. They re-signed him to a small deal. Treshaun Wharton's a good player. I think, ultimately, he might be able to bring some juice there. But, that was the whole – they passed on Devontae Wyatt. Wyatt had, some – with their first pick. And he had some issues, off the field stuff, some assault stuff that, maybe kept them away. There, as you said, there weren't a lot of, just absolutely well-rounded defensive linemen. Even, Travis Jones, the guy the Ravens took, it was kind of like a poor man's Jordan Davis. I think that's a nose tackle, right? That's not a starting edge and a defensive tackle that's going to keep Chris Jones off the field for that many snaps. So it was but you have Akeem Hicks available. You have Ndamukong. Sue's going to be pretty expensive, but if you look at the Calais Campbell contract, it was not that expensive, for the Ravens to re-sign him. So there are options there. And defensive end, there are guys like Jerry Hughes, and there are guys, like Melvin Ingram, to boot if you want those guys. I agree with Jeff, though. If you sign Ingram, he's got to be on a pitch count. He's got to be 10, 15 snaps a game, or else it's going to be, he's not going to last until January.
Yeah, and you get a better chance of doing that now that you have Karlaftis in the mix. That you can limit those snaps, and I agree with you that. What about a guy like I keep hearing that maybe Josh Allen of Jackson is available. The Kentucky edge, 6'5", 265. That looks like a Steve Spagnuolo guy. They're reworking things. You only get one time to have your first year and blame everything on somebody else. If they're not wanting to put the 5th year on him, is that? We heard Brett Veach talking about resources, which and I'm going to get to this one here because, I talked, this is what I opened my show with today about Orlando Brown. He said, get Brown taken care of and open up some cap space because, and we can get to that in a minute, but what about Josh Allen? Is there anybody else on a trade beyond just the guys that are available in free agency that might be someone you would target? Because we know that the Chiefs have been, whether we like it or not, that's been a favored route, Eric.
Brian Burns of Carolina is one where he just got his picked up, his 5th year option, but no one knows who he is because he plays for the Panthers and they suck, but he's a wonder. When you talk about bend, that guy has all the freaky athleticism in the world. I bet on everything, but I bet on him to be the sack leader last year. It ended up being Reddick on that team that got a decent amount of sacks, but I know he was the pressure guy. Josh Allen's going to be a little bit more risky, but he's also going to be cheaper because he was taken a year later, I believe, or maybe he was same draft. Okay, so it's the sort of same idea there with those two. I think Burns is the better player of the two, though, and he was taken later, so his 5th year option is not going to be as expensive, I don't think.
Correct. He was 16th, and Allen was 7th overall in that draft.
So that's a guy, man. If they can go with, if they go with Burns, that would be worth it, in my opinion, to get the Orlando Brown deal done, reduce that number down, get Burns into the mix, and then you're playing the same song and dance with Burns. But even with Burns, you have the 5th year option, and then you have 2 tags, right? I know the tag's expensive for defensive linemen, but it's the same. I believe it's the same tag for all defensive linemen, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, we had a conversation last year.
No,
they do have it broken up.
Tackle. It was offensive linemen are the same.
And so it's linebacker. That's the one that the off-ball guys get screwed because the Von Millers are linebackers in that system, but the defensive end. But even then, like an Akeem Hicks would qualify for the defensive end, so it's a little bit suppressed, I think. Although who knows? But like to me, you can play that game now that you have cap space, and that guy's a premium position.
I'm looking that up because that is important because I know the linebackers are always trying to get that, and the tight ends always want to be wide.
Well, there's a reason why guys like Joe Thuney are available because no one wants to franchise tag a guard except for Washington with Brandon Sheriff because the franchise tag a guard, it costs just as much as a tackle. And that's a bad positional value deal.
Defensive end is separate. The tag for 22 on DN was 17.9, but for D tackles, it was 17.4.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, Grady Jarrett just got an extension today. Defensive tackles are well paid in the NFL right now.
And linebacker, it's 18.7 this year. So the linebackers have been getting paid, I think, because they've all been edge guys. So that is of note. Let's talk about the Orlando Brown contract because I asked Brett Veach today about the defensive line and, was it kind of that thing like the cornerback that they just couldn't get to it? Is it still a work in progress and something he wants to do more of? And 3 times in answering about the defensive line, he brought up Orlando Brown and his contract potentially being able to open up some resources for him. $16.7 million if he's on the franchise tag. They could probably bring that number down to the $6-7 million range on an extension, which they say they want to give him. He says he wants. They say he's their left tackle. He says he wants to play left tackle. He dedicated his life to making Patrick Mahomes' wedding a success based upon some of his comments earlier. Patrick Mahomes is not going anywhere. I'm not in the head of Brett Veach, but I took that as a statement to Orlando Brown through the media to get this done. And I'm fine if they don't get it done and take the hit. If they do get it done and don't sign anybody, because I'd like to see them get even more on top of their cap. That's not usually how they do business, right? They like to spend all the way to the top every year. Although Brett Veach has also mentioned having flexibility going into the year several times this offseason as well. So maybe he's shifting gears on that front as well. But Jeff, do you agree with me that was a message to Orlando Brown that it's time to quit screwing around and let's get to work on this?
Yeah, you know what? One of my favorite movies is Public Enemies with Johnny Depp. He's playing John Dillinger, and he has this philosophy that was taught to him about you don't make decisions when you're desperate. So, right. and I think when he makes a decision and someone says, well, when you're desperate, you have no choice. And this is kind of the perfect example of that, where a year ago at this time, a lot of people were excited about them finally getting a left tackle and what Orlando Brown could bring. But this is the other side of this, in that when you have a guy coming in the way he came in here, wanting to be a left tackle, pushing his way out of Baltimore for that very reason, he's not giving no discounts here. Let's face it. He's going to be a pain in the butt in this process. And I think the Chiefs are starting to realize that. And they're starting to be aware of, hey, he's a smart guy. I think he played better than I thought he would for this franchise, but there's always going to be this question about what his actual value is. And I'm not with you on the idea. I don't care how it goes. I think if they end up paying him $22 million a year to play left tackle, is a huge mistake. You hope that. What's that?
Well, no, I mean, just to clarify, I don't think he's worth that number. I think he's going to probably get that number. My point is, I don't care if they I don't mind if they don't if they don't clear out the room and then immediately spend it on a defensive end. Right? If they hold their water and have it so that if there's an in-season move or a training camp move or something like that, they have the money, or even just setting up so they have the rollover for next year to be in a better cap situation for the future. I'm not enamored with Orlando Brown at left tackle. I mean, part of me sees this as an opportunity to say, listen, shop it. Like Laramie Tunsil, is he on the block? Can Mekhi Becton play left tackle as well for a lot less money? Is somebody willing to give you draft?
Andre Dillard, who just had, his decline. I mean, he's a much better athlete than Orlando Brown. It's not as good of a tackle. But here's the thing.
But in
fifth round,
Joe Tooney out to left.
That's what they last year they did not have outs. They did not have Humphrey. They did not have Trey Smith at this point in time. Now they have Tooney, and we know Tooney played was wonderful last year. Brown, Trey Smith and Humphrey were also great. They get this Darian Kennard from Kentucky, who graded wonderfully in the SEC as a right and has right tackle ability. I look, it's not the best offensive line they could do, but if you go, Tooney, Allegretti, right, and then you go Humphrey, Smith, and this Kennard guy, if that's your floor right now, that gets Orlando Brown's ass into the building and writing a contract, in my opinion, because now you can look him and because last year, the Orlando Brown thing was partially well, what else are you going to do? You're really going to take Brady Christensen from BYU at 30 or whatever or 31. Now it's well, what are you going to do? It's we'll move Joe Tooney out to tackle. We'll play Nick Allegretti, who has starting experience at left guard. We have two great players at center and right guard. We got this right tackle who was a great pass protector in college and a great run blocker. And we have a quarterback who has made do with the likes of Andrew Wiley there for significant parts of his career. We're fine. I think to me that drives Orlando Brown's price down maybe more than we think.
Well, and the ball's coming out faster too. They're going to be playing a different style of football more often, where it's not going to be let's wait 5 seconds for Tyreek Hill to run down the field, get 70-yard bomb. It's going to be look at the ball out quick. Let's throw to bigger body guys. Let's be on time, and that does affect his value as well.
Well, and one of the things I was looking at with the tracking data, if you want to look at my Twitter, I've been looking at linebackers, how much they bite on play action, and then how much they flow against the run. And there's this really cool trade-off, right? Guys like Willie Gay flow really well to the run, but they bite on play action. There's that, there's very few unicorns that have the great instincts that don't. And I looked at it from an offense perspective. Linebackers do not move against the Chiefs. They play the run game is on easy mode for this offense, right? And it might change because of Tyreek, but Travis Kelce's still there. Patrick Mahomes is still who he is, right? Linebackers do not they don't bite on play action and they don't flow against the run. They don't do anything against the Chiefs. They stand still. So when you talk about the run game, and I think this is not to bring this back to a running back, this is why they signed Ronald Jones. They need a guy, their offensive line was killing people last year because it was on easy mode for them. If they could get a running back that could put his foot in the ground and gain 8 yards of play, we saw it with McKinnon in the playoffs. And they show Orlando, they're look, Orlando Brown, you have the easiest job. You went from one of the easiest jobs in football, playing left tackle for Lamar Jackson, to one of the second easiest job in football, which is play left tackle for Patrick Mahomes. We'll ship you out here as fast as Baltimore shipped you out of there. I think that's there's some reasoning to that now.
I think there is. We also, does any of us want to put our hand in the air and say they're actually going to consider it?
No,
I don't think they have. No, but but look, did we think Brett Veach was capable of this draft a week ago?
I hadn't seen it, so to say. I mean, I hoped it. I've always thought he had the right answers. So, I mean, I guess capable, yes. Would I have said it would go this well? And again, I do think part of it was the circumstances around him. But
sure,
when people are dropping 50s and you bend over and pick it up, it doesn't make you dumb, right? I mean,
what the Ravens have been doing for 2 decades.
But to your point, yeah, I mean, I think it's so hard to judge general managers because they're the decisions that you see that they make huge decisions, but not many of them.
Yep.
Right. So it is difficult to quantify who the good ones are. The sucky ones can hide for a while and good ones can be, hidden as well. And so I hopefully what we're seeing is the full body of making all these different kinds of moves coming together, and that Brett Veach is, the third cog of the quarterback, coach, and general manager putting it all together. And because I definitely think they're reshaping this roster, to Jeff's point earlier about how many new guys are going to be on this, or maybe it was yours, Eric, about how many new guys are going to be on this 53. I think it was Jeff. I think that's a correlation to what Brett Veach can do. But I mean, I guess if I'm saying that he's sending a message to Orlando Brown, that like, come on, it's time, let's get this done, then I got to believe he's thought about it. What is life at Orlando? They've thought about it because guys get hurt, right? They had to think about it for one game when he got hurt in warmups, and they moved Joe Thuney out there and it worked. They've seen it. They've got tape of it. So, I mean, I'd like to believe that every stone has been overturned and they've looked at it. Is there anything? Let's finish this with this real quick. They threw 5 defensive backs in the draft, and then they acquired Lonnie Johnson for virtually nothing. It's a conditional 7th round pick in 24. But Eric, do you want to climb on your soapbox and talk about the past high draft picks that Brett Veach likes to bring into the mix?
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is, right? Like, it's just.
But do you have any hope for success on this? His PFF rating was. Like, it's a color that you don't usually see.
He was a negative WAR player 2 out of the 3 years he's been there.
It's red. His grade was 31. When I opened.
Look, what team? I'll say this about Justin Reed the same way I say about Lonnie Johnson. Where was he playing football? That way, he was playing football in a mega church, not a football team. The Houston Texans, like. Where you're a college admissions and you're like,
hits, Jeff, we're playing the hits tonight.
This guy went to high school in Toma, Wisconsin. Okay. Like you're a college admissions person. You got a grade on a curve there. No, but it's throwing numbers at the problem, right? Like that's fine. I mean, the part of the thing is like Brett Veach kept his nature in this draft. He's still very aggressive. He's still, but he deviated from it and he gave and like ultimately he worked with a different set of cards than he has before. And I think this is the first time we've gotten to see that. So he's still going to do this kind of stuff and it's still going to be fine. I mean, Lonnie Johnson will probably make the team. He'll probably be okay. I mean,
I don't know that
Mike Hughes is okay.
I don't know that it'll make the team. I don't know, Jeff. You got any?
Yeah, I can't shake the image of him in that playoff game back in 19 when he was trying to cover Travis Kelce. He's supposed to be their answer to covering Travis Kelce. He just was awful. And look, it's the idea of him is great. A 6'3", 210-pound corner who can play safety for you, but it's just like Eric said, it's like, well, I want to give him a chance. I don't want to be Mr. Negative in May, deriding the guy, but no, I'm not optimistic about him being a difference maker on this team or even being on this team come September.
They now have, and I forget which one did which, but they have the guy who tried to sneak it on the fake punt in 19, and they have the guy who landed on the blocked punt, right? Like one of them. Johnson landed on the punt, right? And Reed tried to fake it. Isn't that right for the big bold special teams?
Yeah, Reed did fake it. That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. So
you guys doubted Dirty Dan on that play too. Dirty Dan's one play. I mean, Dirty Dan is like the worst player in league history with like 4 pick sixes. I will say.
Could they have won the game without Dirty Dan sniffing that out? Like, would they?
Yeah, they put up 51 in that game.
Yeah, but I mean, they don't get the ball back right away, right then when they do. If Dirty Dan,
yeah, they win 42-35 instead of 51-31 or whatever.
I'm just saying, because if he doesn't make that play, maybe Tyrann Mathieu not putting his hands.
If Dirty Dan doesn't pick up Phillip Rivers in Mexico City on that Monday night that year, I mean, like Dirty Dan is. I mean. Like I said, Dirty Dan
scored like 5 touchdowns, didn't he? 6 touchdowns.
That's what I'm saying. He picked 6 Drew Brees in 16. He picked 6 Drew Lock like 5 times. Poor kid.
Dirty Dan is a better player than he'll be remembered in this
because it was so bad last year. Yeah. It's like Eli. I mean, I'm making a ridiculous comparison because Eli Manning won a Super Bowl and was absolute nails at the quarterback. But like we all remember Eli as just an awful quarterback because that's exactly what he was for the last 5 years of his career. But the guy was absolute stone cold nails in the 2011 playoffs. Dirty Dan is like a good dime linebacker that ended up was playing free safety for half the season in 2021 and was atrocious.
Yeah. By the way, to answer this question from Steve, can they trade Brown on the tag? They can, yes. And Irish Mac, who said, great show, guys. I say thank you. Again, don't cost nothing. Know us, like us, love us, hit those buttons, helps us out a lot. And we look forward to talking to you again here on Red, Gold, and Bold. So for Jeff Chadiha, NFL Network, NFL.com, Eric Eager from Pro Football Focus, my name is Soren Petro, saying thanks for joining us here on Red, Gold, and Bold.